So day 3 of the recording, and we've had 2 wonderful days of shooting, got a little intense. We took a short break and we are back. And today we are going to do the fillers. We are going to shoot some of the questions that have not yet been asked or need a little bit more clarity. So go ahead, Amit.
In the previous podcast, somehow you have heard about how Sumit has given an example about Krishna and Arjuna. So Sumit, in the article you have mentioned Krishna's approach on positive and negative discrimination.
Correct. Basically, when you talk to somebody and you try to convince them and you try to tell them about something or you try to convey something to an audience that's not very receptive, there are 2 or 3 different ways. There are many different ways, but 2 primary ways to do it is, we've all heard of coaxing, cajoling. So you coax the person, please do this. You cajole saying, oh, you're the best at this. I need your input.
Okay, like praising them.
Yeah, but in this case, Krishna uses all of the techniques, but primarily uses positive and negative discrimination, right? So he uses very, very hard negatives and he uses superlative positives. What is he trying to do? He's trying to now get Arjuna out of his shock and out of his dilemma to actually do something about it. He's very hard with Arjuna. He tells Arjuna a lot of things that actually shake him up to his very foundations and core. Arjuna, if you know, was a very powerful, the most powerful warrior. And Krishna hits him hard and questions his abilities, and he uses words
like Krishna crushes him to the ground and build him up.
Absolutely, and that's what he does. So he calls, and I've said this, so he calls Arjuna delusional. He calls him impotent, and if you all understand what impotent means, that you can't derive a result. He cautions Arjuna. He says, you'll become infamous of being the commander-in-chief on the battlefield and not being able to lead the charge. He tells him that you're a coward. He tells him that you're being weak. You're unnecessarily in grief. You're mourning. You're lamenting. He says, Arjuna, he tells him, you're bewildered, so that you've lost your mental faculties. He says, you don't understand the value of life. He says, how have these impurities come upon you? He cautions Arjuna and he says, do not yield to this degraded impotence. First he says impotent, and then he says, do not give in to degraded impotence. What is degradation? Degradation means falling down to the very rock bottom. You can't fall any further. It says degraded impotence. And he calls him and he says, you're being petty and you're being weak. That's all the negative. He hurls this at Arjuna. He strikes very, very hard. He hurts Arjuna like to the very core of his existence. He challenges him. He knows that each word that he uses is going to shake Arjuna. He's trying to wake him up from his slumber and say, do it. There's an army in front of you. You've got to fight, otherwise you're going to be defeated. You have no choice.
It's like an example in a work. In work, like people will say, you can't do this, and you will get the urge to do the work.
Correct. You're not fit enough to do this.
Yeah.
Sometimes our bosses will do this to us, right? And then finally he chastises and he smashes Arjuna. So these are things that these are negative. He's trying to motivate, but he's using negative names. So that's the negative discrimination. And a great warrior, like let's say Arjuna, he takes pride in his ability to fight. And he's smashing that very foundation. And that really shakes up Arjuna. He speaks in a different tone because he realizes that just slapping somebody may not be the right way. So he also uses motivation, he uses teaching. And here are a few examples. Kindness, compassion, understanding. Hey, listen, I know what you're going through, Arjuna, but you know what? We've got to do this. You don't have a choice. It's the tone of voice that he's using. When it's hard, when it's soft. I can say the same thing. I can say, Amir, you're useless. Amir, try to do something about this. So now this is coaxing, cajoling, all of these techniques. So in some cases now he praises Arjuna. He calls Arjuna chastiser of the enemy. That means you are going to teach the enemy a lesson. Chastiser of the enemy. We chastise our children for doing the wrong thing, right? And apart from chastising, he praises Arjuna's virtues. What are his positives? What are his qualities? And even though he's using very scathing words, indirectly he's also telling Arjuna that, Arjuna, you're actually better than you think you are. Why are you thinking less of yourself? Why are you thinking that you can't do this? And what he does is he empowers Arjuna to be liberated from his flawed thinking. So he's now removing Arjuna, the person, from the way Arjuna is acting. Arjuna is acting in a certain manner, but that's not him. It's just that his mind that's been playing all of these tricks on him. And he now brings Arjuna to a place of equilibrium. So where Arjuna is able to see the negatives of what he is going to or is not going to do, and he can see the positives of what he is going to do or what he may not do. And he assures Arjuna of what he is capable of doing. So this is the way Krishna deals with Arjuna, positives and the negatives, because both work. But of course, you've got to be very careful when you use the negatives and when you use the positives.
Can you give a live example of positive and negative?
Yeah, so for example, when somebody is very, let's say, depressed, you need to gauge the person's inner strength. And if the person doesn't have any inner strength left, then you can't be hitting that person because the person's already fallen down. He's never going to get back up. Your job is to pick that guy up and then use a certain different method to get him to come back to what he's supposed to do. So it all depends on the tone of voice, the words, because every word we use has got tremendous significance. Every word can be interpreted in a certain way. So what's really happening is that I'm using those words to trigger an emotion or trigger an action from the other person. So that's why these words are so important. Also, it depends on the circumstances. It also depends on the situation. Under some situations, certain words may have a different meaning, and under different situations, a word may have you may interpret it differently because your frame of mind is such. Because whatever input you receive, you're going to interpret it in a different way based on how you are feeling internally and how you process that information. So he finally guides Arjuna.
You have experienced so many things in life. Have you ever used this thing on someone?
All the time.
Positive and negative?
All the time. Initially, my gut reaction to people not doing what they're supposed to do used to be to lash out. I have what is known as a flash in a pan anger. So when you pour oil on a flame, it'll go whoosh, and then it'll die down again once the oil is gone, right? When the oil is burnt. I used to be that way. Now I'm a lot more measured. I do lose it. I do flip. I do yell. I do scream. But I do it a lot less than I used to. I'm a lot more measured because I've seen the downsides of doing that and I've seen the upsides of doing that. So now when I'm actually screaming at somebody, I have not lost it completely. It's what is known as controlled anger.
Yeah.
There are two ways. Let's talk about a normal fight. There are two ways to fight. When you're, let's say, in a street fight and you completely lose your mental faculties and you rely only on your brute force and strength, you're not going to win. You've got to also use your head. So the same thing applies when you're using, let's say, anger as a mode of expression. It's the last thing you should do. But if you need to do it, you need to have your anger always under control. It has to deliver a certain message. Like I'm being very clear, it's the last option. You should not go to that. So coaxing, cajoling, motivating are better ways to do it. That's the positive way of management. But sometimes you're left with no choice. Sometimes you're forced to issue a command or issue an instruction and say, listen, do it now.
Sumir, sometimes you are told the sources of taking advice from books, from other people, from friends, from elders and all. So what advice can you take from our elders when we are not open to them? See, like example, some families are not open to talk to their daughter or son. How do we convey that?
First of all, Neuro Linguistic Programming applies to anybody from all ages, all age groups, all circumstances, all walks of life. So one of the primary reasons why elders and why youngsters can't be in sync is because there's a gap in communication. Because the elders refuse to understand or cannot understand the point of view of their kids. And the kids can't understand the point of view of their elders. Yes, I completely agree that the world has changed a lot from the time that our parents were young. And we believe that, the world is different today and therefore our parents are not able to advise us. There may be some truth in that, but that only is limited to the modern technologies. For example, the digital world. Because our parents may not be as digitally savvy as we are. I'll give you a simple example, and this is a very sweet example. We bought my father, who's no more unfortunately, a smartphone. And he printed out a 500-page user manual because he wanted to know how to use the smartphone. So one night I walk into the living room and I see my son. He must have been probably 12 or 13 at that point in time. And my dad sitting on the armchair. My youngest son, Karthi, is sitting on the armrest. And he's showing my dad how to use the the smartphone. I saw that and it was such a beautiful thing. But that's just an example. My dad wants to know how this technology works, but younger kids adapt to that very quickly. Yeah. So again, it's an much older man, the grandfather, learning something from his grandson. What's the moral of the story? That my dad was open to learn from his grandson who was 13 years old. He had no ego. Coming back to the elder issue. Elders in our family, even if there is a communication gap, which can be bridged using NLP if it's practiced properly, have our best interests at heart. Who, apart from our parents, will want the best for us? They are the first people. Yet, what happens is when we reach a certain age, for example, adolescence, we start shutting our parents out because we are going through changes, we are going through mental changes, hormonal changes, and we are unable to communicate effectively with our parents what we are going through. At the same time, our parents are not able to communicate with us what they are actually feeling and how to show us the right path or navigate through that period of adolescence. It's a very hard period for boys and girls both. So there again, NLP becomes fundamentally important. I'll share something very personal, and I don't say this to many people, but I think it's time. At one point in time in my life, I was in very bad shape. I'd lost all hope. So what did I do? I used to go out every night and get smashed drunk. I'd come home late in the night and just go to sleep. You know what my dad used to do early in the morning? He wouldn't come and wake me up. Wake up, wake up, wake up. No, he wouldn't say that. He would come with a cup of tea to my bed. He would put his hand, I had hair then.
Okay.
So he'd run his hands through my hair like that with such love. And I could see that love. He was loving me, he was pitying me, he was feeling deep fatherly emotions that my son is suffering. And he put his hands through my head and he says, Beta, chai pee le. Get up and drink your tea. I'm hungover. And my dad is telling me to drink tea. The first thing I want to do is I want to lash out and say, I don't want that tea. Go away. But because he was dealing with me with so much love and so much understanding, I couldn't retaliate. And I would say, okay, Papa, I'd wake up. And he would say something even nicer. He says, drink your tea and go back to sleep. Fully well knowing that after I've had that cup of tea, it's a pick-me-up and I'll be a little bit more alert. But this is an example. It was the way my dad dealt, the tone of voice that he used to wake up a son who's been out drinking all night, who's going through tremendous pressure in his head. He had his best interests at heart. He couldn't, for the life of him, understand what I was going through. And I couldn't communicate with him what I was feeling. Then, of course, once that happened and I realized, we were able to sit and talk and discuss what was going on. He was going through stuff as well, and we were able to share. That was a very beautiful bond. I don't think we've had any acrimony after those few incidents. So these are the kind of examples. And I always say that, we don't value our elders enough. And I'm not saying this because I'm a father and a grandfather now, but I'm very proud to say that the kind of communication I can have with my kids is actually indeed very, very open. And we've had some very open, honest discussions about a lot of things. But see, my sister is 14 years younger than me, my only sister, my only sibling. And she's like my baby. She's actually my first kid before I had my own. So she calls me Bhai, which in Hindi is brother. You won't say Bhaiya, she'd say Bhai, and it's very sweet. And because of that, my kids call me Bhai. My kids' friends, some of them will also call me Bhai. My parents called me Bhai. And a lot of people here in Mysore also ended up calling me Bhai.